Two kinds of misogyny. I don't talk about misogyny very much in my channel, so I'm going to correct that right now. Of course, misogyny just means hatred and contempt for women, if you go by the standard dictionary definition. Currently, Wikipedia claims that misogyny includes objectifying women and violence against women. But that's just a propagandistic definition, and it's a bit of a joke, and an insult to the intelligence of everyone who reads it. If you are misogynistic, then it doesn't necessarily mean that you experience any particular emotion like anger or fear. It just means that you have a general preference for men, or a bias that favors men over women in some way. But misogyny can also be divided up into misogynies, and I want to draw a sharp distinction between two very different types of misogyny, because their differences have noteworthy political implications, and because these two types of misogyny are not necessarily linked to each other at all, and so it would be fairly misleading to conflate or equate the two. The first type of misogyny is evaluative. If you are less impressed with or more irritated by someone's work or behavior only because they happen to be a woman, then you are somewhat misogynistic. That is, this first type of misogynist perceives what women do in a more negative light, just because they are women. I'm sure that most people who call themselves feminists, and most people in general, would agree that this is the sort of misogyny that concerns them the most. But there's also a second type of misogyny. The second type of misogyny is motivational. This type of misogynist doesn't try to impress women as much, and doesn't worry as much about offending women. If you are less worried about what someone thinks about you just because they happen to be a woman, then you are somewhat misogynistic. I would say that this second type of misogyny appears to be the one that feminist activists are genuinely concerned about. It also looks to me as though feminist activists can benefit greatly by smearing together these two distinct types of misogyny, which is another reason why I want to draw the distinction between them. In my opinion, this second type of misogyny is much less representative of misogyny for the general public than the first type. The first type of misogyny is more along the lines of what first comes to mind when your average person hears the word misogyny. But for feminist activists, the second form of misogyny is viewed as much more problematic and truly dangerous, because it means not being afraid of offending women and their self-appointed representatives, the feminists. This is how MRAs and MGTOWs threaten feminist hegemony. Not only is this a rebellion against feminist hegemony, it is also a rebellion against human nature. In my opinion, most leaders and politicians can easily get away with the first kind of misogyny, but not the second. Seeking women's approval is just not an option for the alpha male or for anyone seeking power. Seeking women's approval is mandatory, and unfortunately, feminist groups have been very successful at gaining recognition as the de facto voice of women. One could apply the same distinction between evaluative and motivational hatred to misandry as well, of course. I want to close by saying that if you want to call something misogyny or misandry, or call someone a misogynist or a misandrist, then you need to have some standard of reference. The standard of reference that makes the most sense would be the other sex. Which sex do you love more? Which sex do you hate more? But regardless of how arbitrary the standard might be, it's a good idea to take a very close look at why and how misogyny and misandry are relevant in the first place.